Okay, guess we're gonna go ahead and get started here on this. Looks like maybe tonight we'll have a more reasonable audience, which isn't actually a bad thing. It's probably a good thing. And in fact, one of the things I'm going to chat about a little bit with you folks, um, as we kind of discuss where we are as a project and what our goals are and what we're trying to achieve and so forth. Um, Tonight, let me pull up my little agenda here. Goals tonight are to talk primarily about the soft launch, Grafana, and we're going to talk a little bit about the storage partner program and what we're trying to achieve there. That will sort of segue out of the soft launch idea and what's going on. And, I also want to cover something really quickly that, you know, I think a lot of people probably get, but if you don't get it, I think this will be useful. And, if you pass this on in the community, if you pass it on in the forums, Twitter, whatever, probably not a bad thing, because I think that there's some real vitamins here in us sort of pursuing a very specific agenda and direction and curve, I guess, for lack of a better word. And I'll just start it off by saying what I'm really talking about here. It really started with the pie thing, and we're still getting fallout from the pie. I just responded to a tweet where somebody wished us a slow death as a project, and I just responded to. They probably didn't read the tweet they responded to correctly, but we aren't banning Raspberry Pi. We don't have the ability to ban Raspberry Pi. You want to build a Pi unit? Have at it. Build the best pie you can possibly build and look to make some money off of it if that's what you think you want to do. We've just decided we're not going to support it, right? We're just not going to put energy into it. We're not just going to you know build things, knowledge base wise and put energy and time from community supporters into it. That's all. It's a permissionless network. You want to do it, do it. You can build from source. If you can't figure out how to build from source, maybe you're in the wrong place. So, it's that. And where that really kind of, extrapolates to, if you look today, we also received an email from a YouTuber. Um, I'm tempted to actually out him right here with a name, but I'm not going to. Who essentially told us that, he was really disappointed in our quote unquote support and kind of just went up one side and down the other, that we wouldn't give him a free Examiner and put him at the front of the batch and get him shipped immediately so that he could go online and do what all these other YouTubers are doing, which is just nonsense. And, he actually made my job easy in asking for a refund. So I gave it to him because, in all regards, we just do not want this kind of direction for the project. And what I'm really trying to get to is this, and I think you're going to appreciate this when it's over. And I think some of you already do appreciate it and do get it. You know, we went for so many, months or years building this thing at a nice, measured, slow pace. And yeah, it was frustrating. It was painful in some ways because we weren't getting the money we needed to fund it. We weren't getting, a lot of the support we needed. We couldn't get listed on exchanges, blah, 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 all the things that essentially happened. And then, we've been over this ad nauseum, but due to two circumstances, um, the 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 community just blew up. It just exploded. And it exploded not on a lie, so to speak, because look, if you really want to hear my viewpoint, everything that the YouTubers are saying is true. It's just on a different timeline, right? It's just not on the timeline that they're saying. So, it is what it is. But on their timeline, we get 7,000 new members overnight. And 7,000 new members are fine and it's great. And it makes the project look like we have some real spark and fire and lightning and all that sort of good stuff that's going on. But here's where the rubber meets the road on that. And this is where essentially saying we're not going to support the Pi folks is probably a real positive for everybody who's in this room right now. We went from 300 and some providers up to about 2,300. But if we had taken kind of a different tack than I've sort of enforced on our community, um, which is essentially, acting like we don't want the growth, right? And being very sort of terse with people who keep asking stupid questions over and over and over again, we'd probably be at 10,000 providers right now. If we had just been like every other crypto project and said, hey, let's just ride this pump as far as we can. Let's push the coin price as high as we can get it to go. Let's do this provider network as high as it can go. Let's get it as close to Filecoin as we can. We'll be worth billions in no time. And then we can just rug everybody and we don't even have to build a project. We could just take the money out of the coins that we currently hold and we can all just walk away with FU money and laugh. And if you don't know that that happens in crypto, it happens all the fucking time. And it just isn't going to happen here because that's not what we're doing. We're doing something completely different. And if we had put up 10,000 hosts and then went out to try and start building sales behind those 10,000 hosts, none of you would make any money. You'd all make nothing. And be really unhappy, and then the network would collapse really quickly, and then the people would be talking very more much so about the big red candle of the network's collapse versus the slow measured growth that we've been trying to achieve. So me being an insane asshole out on the community right now is a tactic, and if you don't know that, then you don't know me. And at the end of the day, it's probably not going to stop anytime soon, right? Because I want to keep those numbers down. I don't want the network to grow to 10,000 hosts and 900 petabytes or 1 exabyte right now because I can't support it with sales. I can't get out there right now and sell storage to people on this network with enough to make you people stick around for the next 5 years and be really satisfied financially that you made the right decision and want to keep throwing additional storage at the network. So that's it in a nutshell. That's the entirety of it, and I think most of you guys get it, and I think most of you really appreciate it and really recognize that the way that we're doing it is going to be the right way, that we're just going to go at our own pace. We're going to try and build this thing the right way, slow but steady. We don't give a shit about what happens in crypto. We don't care about, following some roadmap about how crypto projects work. We don't spend money on YouTuber advertising. It's not any of that. We're just going to build the best possible network we can. And then we're going to go out and we're going to sell it to real companies for real money. All right. So that's a good segue into the J18 thing. And, y'all ran with scissors on J18, and it is what it is. I wasn't going to get in front of that train. What happened is kind of this, and I'll just explain it really clearly so that you can reiterate it in the forums and so forth. Over the last couple of years, as we've been putting this thing together, we started off very early on by saying that we wanted to do a layer two on an already established blockchain. And there was already a protocol in place called a renter host protocol that allowed for this ability for, you to uh, use smart contracts in a payment channel or a state channel above the blockchain, and it all worked pretty good, and very single purpose blockchain, so very transactionally performant, and just really a pretty good environment. But when you really try and dive in and do that layer two on top, all of a sudden all of the weaknesses become exposed. And so when we first started out and we realized, once we dug in what was going to need to happen, we had to go back sort of to the beginning and really just sort of right from the ground up. So we discarded a whole bunch of software and started over. And that told our early stakeholders, well, guess what? It's not going to happen this quarter. It's going to probably be a ways out. And that has kind of become a habit for us. And maybe it's not a great habit, but what's happened is as we've reached significant milestones in the software development phase, we've concluded that certain other things need to occur. And so what happened over the course of the last, 2 quarters, the last 2 quarters of 2021, we felt pretty good about everything. We felt really good about the relayer and how it was working. I mean, it had been working since January, but we had been doing some scaling work, and we've been doing, some abilities that were not in there originally, and some more compatibility in the S3 phase and all of that stuff. And what ended up, being a situation is we ended up with three major sprints that we knew were going to be challenging for us to resolve, quickly, that they were going to take a little bit of time for us. And at the same time, we had this really, sort of sketchy hash rate on our mining. And so we were kind of like, can't really launch with this hash rate, because if we launch with this hash rate, what'll probably happen is we'll get 51 by the old project just out of spite. And then our rep will be in tatters, and we'll end up having to, back up 10 yards and punt and figure out what we got to do. So we started engaging ourselves thinking we were going to have to do proof of stake pretty rapidly. But then again, 7,000 of you showed up. Right? So it's not all bad, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the coin did fly up really high, too high in my view, but at the end of the day, I knew it would. I've been saying it all along that the supply's been completely drained off by the early community supporters. There's no coins available. You can't build a bag like anybody who's been here for 2 years has. You're never going to build one of those bags. It's just not possible for you now. And that's okay, because what'll happen is that the coin price will find its right level around here or above or wherever it ends up going. And then sooner or later, it'll reach a point where early adopters will feel compelled to start distributing those coins. It ain't anywhere near where we are right now, though. I know guys that have 3 million coins. They're not getting rid of any of them to you. So if you think if you think the coin's going back to 400, I mean, good luck on that. But I sort of doubt it at this point. The supply doesn't warrant it. But what ended up happening is we looked at the hash rate, and when the coin price went up, of course, what happens? Hash rate follows price. And so the hash rate just went crazy, and now we're sitting on 10 petahash or better. Might be maybe higher. I haven't looked at it today. I guess 11 was the last thing I saw a couple days ago, which is a pretty respectable hash rate. And we're getting a lot of different varied models now of ASICs that are out there instead of just the single model S11 that was out there. And so the benefit that we see of having that kind of hash rate, migrate over, and the price holding in the zone where it's at, is the chance of a 51 becomes a lot less. You could still do it, but it'd be pretty difficult right now to take over that much hash rate of this project. You can't like go to Nice Hash and rent, this amount of hash rate. I think there's really some tiny amount of hash rate available for rent out there. The Chinese used to have quite a bit of farmed rate that you could rent, but because G turned it all off, that's not really a thing anymore, right? So if that, becomes a thing in the USA, we know some guys that have some pretty good sized farms, and we'll just get in touch with those folks and say, look, can you spin up another couple hundred units, because looks like we're getting attacked. Anyway, what ends up happening is, that takes up a lot of our energy and focus into the end of the year, and then the whole thing blows up, like we just said. And ultimately, we're trying to organize this soft launch, but everything in the project is now being tested to absolute extremes. And so these examiners were selling like 5 a week, and we're just saying that's fine. I mean, we'll just build this thing out slowly, and by the time we get 2 years in, we'll have a couple thousand of these things out there, and there'll be a real nice performant layer underneath. And then suddenly a whole bunch of you showed up, and you just essentially sold out my entire ability for the chassis manufacturer to put them on the street. And again, we didn't do what every other crypto project would have done. We didn't like oversubscribe the sale 5x. We didn't. We sold exactly what we know we can fulfill. And so, at the end of the day, 9 months from now, you're not going to be looking back and saying, when are my miners going to show up? I could have easily booked 10, $20 million worth of orders over the December holidays. But again, it's just not what we do. And it's not what we're ever going to do. So That taxed us really hard. But then the other thing that happened is you blew up the infrastructure, right? Well, that's on us. When I say you blew it up, you were the folks that showed up, and all of that extra strain and stress on it was the catalyst. But we blew it up. We didn't plan for the growth correctly, and we got our ass handed to us. And you know one of my favorite fish songs is ass handed. So the story is that we had to go back and completely rework all that stuff from the ground up, and it's been a very, very taxing scenario, and it's not been pleasant, and at the end of the day we're still not done, right? We're still working on it. The telemetrics are all being reworked from the ground up. The various server configurations are being worked from the ground up, and we're building out an infra that we think we can take into a real product launch. So those folks were all sort of, enmeshed in stuff over the last couple of weeks or months. And then, the core engineers I sort of protect, you know, religiously. And fortunately, they are in a country all to themselves, and it's easy to do. So those folks, just kept kind of grinding away. But they have two or three very large sprints that they have to complete that are still going to take a lot of time. One is called active repairs, which is this notion of when multiple providers fail and shards go down and we start to lose the durability factor that we're trying to hit, which is 11 nines or better. Then what happens is that you have to actually put shards on new provider units. Well, because it's all crypto based, there's public key cryptography, deciding on where the shards live and who has them. You can't just copy one from another. It doesn't work that way. You have to actually download the whole data set again, make up a whole new erasure code set, re-encrypt it, and then send it out back out to new providers so that you have your new redundancy back the way you originally had it. That's an expensive operation. So repairs and churn are really, really, really a problem. And that's repairs deal directly with this term churn. And I'll talk about churn here just in a second because it's really important to everything that's going on right now. And it's important to that pie conversation and the 2000 to 10,000 or whatever. Churn is the death of this kind of project. I guarantee it. Nobody's ever really proven that, by the way, yet at scale, but we can see the future and we understand it really clearly that churn will kill us. So so churn is something that we really have to keep an eye on, and that we're really so active repairs is a big thing that they're working on. Removals is another big one. This one's actually pretty fun because you guys actually make money out of it and we lose money. But what happens with removals is if we upload data to you right now, it just lives on and on and on and on. It doesn't come down. And the thing about that is that you keep getting paid for it. We keep paying you for it, but we can't charge the customer for it. So it ultimately ends up, hitting right to our bottom line. And, obviously that's not a profitable way to run a railroad. So we can't do that. So that's a big area. And it's going to be a pretty challenging one. And I think it's going to take us all the way in through April before we finally have that fully implemented in the way we really want to do it. And then host selection is this other one that's really interesting. And, this has also been a very large sprint that's probably going to run for the next year and a half. Host selection is this thing that's just going to cover all sorts of really interesting and cool things. And we'll have a meeting coming up on it, maybe in about 2 or 3 weeks, where we just dedicate the whole session to host selection because it's really, really cool. And it will give you a lot of information and feedback about how best to set up your providers so that you end up standing the best chance to make the most amount of money and for the least amount of effort, really, when it all comes down to it. So we'll talk about that. Bottom line of it is that we have these three big things. So we knew they weren't going to be ready. So immediately in November, December, I just said, well, look, we got to call this a soft launch of what's coming up because it's really not going to be a true product launch. We're not ready. We need at least until April. But same time, you know, I got to kind of finally start enforcing some product discipline on these people because having a culture of ship, you know, is not something that just accidentally happens. People need to have this sort of fire lit under them that they have to ship product. And it's not always evident that that's the case. If you give developers plenty of time and plenty of resources, they'll just keep building and they'll just keep writing and they'll just keep, abstracting and doing whatever, and they will never ship. And ultimately, that's not really kind of what happened here. I mean, these are legitimate things, and we need, the resources to do them. But um, anyway, that's the story there. So soft launch. So what exactly is it, and what did we intend to accomplish, and what actually happened? Um, I'm going to be really frank with you because that's all we ever are. We're just transparent as we can be on this project, and it didn't do what we wanted it to do. What we wanted it to do was I have this list, and this list is trial applicants who came in over the email. And it's right now about 30 deep, I guess. And of those 30, I think I qualified 20 that look really interesting, that have, serious amounts of data, that have interesting applications that they're running it on, that really seem like they could potentially go on to become real customers and really, drive the network hard almost out of the gate. And I wanted to just go ahead and send out a invite to them on Monday and say, okay, we're ready. Come on in. Here's a coupon for X amount of terabytes over X amount of period of time. These are the people you need to chat with. This is the channel you'll be hanging out in. And, have at it and start uploading, build your relayers, get going, and let's make this thing a real good success. But what ended up happening was we tried it out on three dummies, well, four dummies, counting me, and we weren't ready. We just weren't ready. And at the end of the day, I just said, gosh, this is going to have to not happen. And so I backed it off and we didn't send out the emails. And we had a real come to Jesus session in our team meetup the next day. And ultimately, everybody now is oriented in the right fashion of getting this sort of last little mile cleaned up so that we can send out these invites and onboard these people. The stuff that's missing right now is not huge, by the way. The stuff that's missing is just some, sort of instruction type stuff, how to set up your relayer correctly and not fall into a trench. And, it's stuff having to do with how to configure Docker on Windows, and stuff having to do with, how big of a cache am I going to need, and, how do I set it up, and do I put it on HDD? Do I put it on NVMe? Do I rate it? Do I stripe it? Do I, where's the performance need to be on this thing? And, you know, can I do it in the cloud with you guys? Does it have to be on prem? So there's just a number of these little things. And we know the answers to all of them. But what we didn't have is we didn't have a good sort of onboarding, ramp for these folks to come aboard. So J18, and I don't know what my devs are going to think about this because, we didn't talk about whether I was going to tell you this or not, but J18 is going to become J24. And those people are going to get emails one way or the other, whether we're ready or not by Monday. We will be ready, but we will start to send out those emails to those folks and start onboarding them into the relayer over the next several days. And as those folks come aboard, it'll take them a little bit to get their relayers configured and set up, and we'll do the provisioning of all of the coupons that are going to give them free access. And then ultimately, they'll start uploading data and testing. They'll expose bugs in various S3 app compatibility. They'll expose other bugs in the Docker configs and so forth. And at the end of the day, 2, 4 weeks from now, we'll look back in hindsight and we'll see that this soft launch was pretty successful and we did start onboarding real live data. So J18 is really J24 now, and we apologize profusely for building it up as big as we did. I didn't build it up at all, but I didn't get in the way of others building it up, so that's still on me. And the end of the day, we will get it done, and you will start to see the data flow. And you will be happy that we've kept the network down to about 2,000 providers. It's not growing like it was. I mean, I was looking at that number going up in horror. I mean, I was watching it every single day going up 300, 400 hosts, and I was like, what the? how is this going to work? How are we going to pay that out for the next 6 months? What's going to happen is going to be awful. So the good news is as this data comes online, it's not going to be spread out that far. You're going to have a good chance to earn some revenues even off this early data that isn't, being spread too far and wide. And so hopefully you appreciate that strategy that we've employed. Okay, so that's it for the soft launch. I'll talk just really briefly about the real launch and what we're sort of planning there, but that will also be a session unto itself coming up. I'm starting the event planning. One of the really cool things that just happened while all this was going on is we were in the process of, trying to book an event so that we could do our real launch in April. I think it's April 23rd is when the event will essentially start. It's happening in Las Vegas, Nevada at a trade show called NAB, which is a media and entertainment show. They typically get about 90,000 people there. If CES is any kind of an indicator, they'll probably get about 50 to 60,000 because of the COVID, but we'll see what happens. Um, we were late in signing up for the booth, but it turned out to actually be in our favor because right at the last minute, somebody decided to give up the exact booth size that we were looking for right next to AWS. And AWS has a city-sized booth, right? I mean, it's this gigantic thing, and it'll be like crazy, and they'll have all their apps and all their people, and they'll have all kinds of just nonsense going on in their booth, and we'll be this tiny little thing right next to them, which is the ultimate David versus Goliath narrative that we totally crave. So it'll be perfect, and we'll just put an Examiner and point it right at them. So it'll be a really good launch for us. We really want you all to come out to Las Vegas if you have an opportunity at the end of April. We're going to have a big community appreciation party. We're going to pull out all the stops on that, and we'll have more info on that as we get closer to it. And our developers will release software one way or the other for that event. And that will be the real live kickoff. Will we actually start charging money for data before then? I think we will. I think we probably will only go maybe 6 to 8 weeks in this trial basis, but who knows? We'll see. It depends, and if we end up getting to a place where we can go a little farther faster, we will, and we'll start charging money. But if not, we'll just keep doing coupons until the actual product release in April. All right, let's move on to Grafana now and talk a little bit about what's going on there. Right out of the gates, my uptime was 993 and now it's 991. What is wrong? Is not a thing. It's just not a thing. I mean, come on, man. At this point, I told you what happened with the infrastructure. We're in the process of doing what are called materialized views so that we can take on massive scale. We designed it incorrectly. There's no, hiding it. We're now getting it designed correctly so that we can take on the scale we need. And in that process, there's going to be some hiccups along the way. And as those numbers change, because like we're changing over from one scanner to another, or there's like, a downtime where there's no scanners for like 12 minutes. And so you end up going from 993 to 991. It's not a thing. It's not going to change anything. It's not going to change the outcome. If your status drops from 993 to 0.45, then you have a problem. Yeah, then you have to talk to us and say what's going on here because this ain't working. But these little things, you really just got to keep them out of the community channels because they're just, it's just really, really taxing the community support leaders who are doing their level best right now to answer all these questions over and over and over and over and over again. And I'm telling you, some of these guys are starting to get burnt out. And that's really something that's not positive for us. We just really don't want that. So where are we with the Grafana? We're really close. Right now he's got most of it pretty well materialized. We've got what we think are going to be the final screens for this initial kind of rollout. We'll obviously continue to tweak and tune what's on the screens, but they look pretty good. There's still some tweaking and things like, he had this color schema going on, and I just told him, look, just get rid of that. It doesn't really help us. Green and red is all we need. Red means you're not getting any money. Green means you are. And ultimately, kind of just keep it real plain Jane for now as we kind of go forward. And then we can start roll out a lot more advanced stuff, as we get in towards closer to launch. So I would say right now, Grafana is probably about 90%, maybe 95% back. We still have some work to do on the servers as well in terms of how we do the cutover, but we're getting really close. So any weirdness that shows up, I think you still have to hang your hat on it, that we're still kind of doing our thing behind the scenes and probably going to be that way for about another week, maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks. And then I think we can probably put the whole Grafana thing to bed. Grafana, by the way, is not going to be the long-term solution. We will abstract this out with, some sort of, Angular React framework and turn it into something that's really just lovely and follows our branding and our colors and all of that sort of stuff. But at this point, Grafana is really easy to sort of push out a lot of really quick and new type stuff. And some of the stuff will stay on Grafana because it makes sense, like the Telegraph stuff coming in from, providers that tend to run it. We're currently doing that mostly on the EXA miners, but that'll be something that we can easily roll out to the DIY crowd. Telegraph essentially feeds back things like disk temps, speed and performance, and drive capacities and all that stuff, and really kind of makes it easy to take a look from a remote perspective at how your thing's doing. So that stuff will stick around on Grafana and so forth. All right, so that's pretty much the Grafana sermon. I'm not going to go too much deeper into that. I want to cover one last thing really quickly about our strategy, and then we'll go ahead and turn it over to questions. I want to start leaving more time for questions on these things because it does seem like you guys do now have a lot of questions, and I want to make sure that you guys get your chance, and so we'll do that. Um, the thing I want to cover right now is this thing that's sort of going on parallel to what our original strategy was. Our original strategy was that we would build out this network, permissionless, crypto based, the whole nine of that. And then, at some point we'll walk away from that side and turn it over to a, community governance mechanism. That's still very much going to be the case at some point down the road. But our thought is that we would build a sales organization and we would go out and we would sell directly to end customers at a really nice price, disruptive price to somebody like AWS or Azure. And we'll still do that. I mean, it's still a thing for us. It's going to happen. But what's likely to happen actually, and what we've kind of like pivoted towards over the last like 4 to 6 is that storage partners are probably going to be the thing for us. They're probably really going to be the pointy end of the spear as we really get accepted into the world. And we've talked a little bit about this MSPs and CSPs and various other partner types. And we've got some really interesting partners as we started to build some groups and channels to explore this a little bit. So like we have one partner, actually a stakeholder in the project, but he's building just an insane data center up in, the whole Scandinavia area. And they do a lot of different kinds of software provisioning, cloud storage stuff, Nutanix and a few other things that they work on, and they do some custom coding of dashboards. They don't consider themselves necessarily as an MSP. They consider themselves more as a distributor to MSPs. So what ends up happening is they build out this giant infrastructure and software dashboarding. They hand it off to individual consultants who have cloud certifications. The individual consultants go out and actually help the corporation set up their storage configurations, right? Determine, what kind of a mix, what kind of a hybrid mix they're going to have from on-prem storage to, public cloud to any other kinds of, cloud configs that they deem necessary based on their own specific needs. And that job right there, that cloud professional right now is just on fire because of that, and they all know that they can make this money as these consultants specifying specific products and services. So specifying is really what we need, right? And so this distributor relationship is really cool because what they can actually do is they can stand up 1,000 relayers, right? They can just spin up 1,000 VMs and then ultimately build a giant caching pool or a bunch of caching pools or whatever. And then ultimately they can just turn that over in a series of addresses to their MSP customers, and their MSPs can go out and just sell like the, crazy, and not have to worry about the customer needing to fall into any holes in configuring relayers, right? And where it works is that they are very, fairly close proximity to most of those customers. Maybe the furthest away they might be, Sweden to Norway or Sweden to Finland, or something along those lines. So, it's a really, really interesting model. And not only is it an interesting model from, you know, us being able to really get access to a large customer base quickly, but it's a really interesting model in that it really allows us to start filling up your guys' instances very rapidly as well. So we really think that partnering thing, and what we also think is that this company is not alone, that they aren't some rogue individual thing that doesn't exist anywhere else. As we started to look around, we realized this is everywhere. We can go almost anywhere in the world right now and find, some entity doing almost the identical thing that these folks are doing. And we just need to go out and sell to them. So, our customer list might ultimately end up being something like, 300 names, right? And yet we still end up filling up a network, to AWS, type scales, right? Where we're getting exabytes of storage that we're pushing out to you guys. In fact, I think that's exactly how it's going to end up working for the first, 1 to 2 years. And then as we establish our credibility, we start building out things like compute on top. We start building out other layers on top of our S3 storage. Then I think we'll probably start to become more of our own individualized entity and doing that sort of stuff. So partners are really big for us. If you are a cloud consultant or you want to become that as your part of your whole thing, we are going to be offering tiers where some you will have the ability to steer some amount of all of your customer traffic directly to your own storage instances or storage preferred storage instances. We can't essentially allow you to do 100%, but we can certainly allow you to do some, and so you can get it kind of going both ways. You can earn on both ends of the scale, and I think that will really end up being a profitable and very productive sort of direction for you all to go. Okay, that's pretty much it for my sermon today. I was going to do real old school religion type stuff today and just thunder from the mount, but it turned out just to be a normal session. So there you go. Let me look and see what kind of questions we got. our our meme god has showed up with the first question. I love that. Lesser come on up.
Well, I didn't know I had my hand raised, but what's going on, guys?
So you had your hand raised as a meme.
Oh, that's cool.
Somebody better screenshot this for you then.
Somebody must have done it for me.
Okay. Well,
But
we'll go on to the next question then. SWN. Got to unmute.
All right, there I am. Sorry about that.
No problem. What's up?
I, I'm curious about adding more storage. I've got the ability to add more to my current location or add more to another location. What do you think's more advantageous in this network?
Well, I mean, it's the same thing, right? I mean, it's the same question. It's this thing where, if we got 2,300 providers, then the next number you got to look at is that 38 petabytes or whatever. And so there's this chart that's going around, and it's an interesting chart, and and I like it. I have to admit, it's pleasant to understand that we bypassed a couple of the other crypto projects out there in terms of capacity. But at the same time, I've actually kind of talked to some people and said, "Look, I don't really want this chart being updated. I don't want it out there right now. It's not helpful to us because the more the chart grows, the more people start thinking, well, I can bring over 200, terabytes from Chia, or I can bring over 500 terabytes from Chia. And it's just going to end in tears, because what will end up happening is those terabytes will sit fallow for some time to come, until we ultimately get our arms wrapped around this sales process and we're able to really start to push data out in a really concerted way. Now, having said that, I think that I'm going to get, my ass handed to me again somewhere in the not too distant future. If I had to predict, I predict that we will kind of go along in this growth phase in sales, thinking, well, we'll just try and do it this reasoned, measured pace, and let's kind of do this and that. And I think something will happen, and we'll see similar to December, where we get the kind of, data input into the network that we just maybe are not really thinking we're going to get right away in whatever quarter. I hope that happens. Obviously, every company hope that happens. Um, but I just kind of think that we're here at the right place at the right time. So if you have a bunch of storage that can go on the network, it really doesn't make sense to load it up today unless you have no other use for it. Like if it's already got chia plots on it, or it's got, some other storage thing that you're making some money off of, then probably leave it there. But if you have the ability to keep it sort of in the bullpen waiting to go online quickly, you probably should. I can't promise anything, but to me, I think you probably should.
Well, my other question is related to the pricing structure. I know you've got the incentives in place, which is helping keep some boundaries, on the lows and highs there. I imagine that as we move further into this project, performance is really going to be a big factor there. And so, for somebody like myself who understands some parts of what this project is and how it compares to AWS and all those things, I don't really understand it fully from those clients or those customers' needs, right? And so if I have a very valuable location and a powerful machine behind all of this storage data that I'm putting out there with high bandwidth internet speeds and so forth, am I more valuable and should I price my storage at the higher end of those incentives or so forth? So I guess I'm just looking for some guidance there, and I compare this pricing structure to others who don't even offer the sort of the open market pricing structure. You just sign up and you go, and you get rewarded, and everybody gets rewarded equally, or they get rewarded based on the performance of what they're putting onto the network.
Yeah, and I think the way you have to look at that is that it's going to be really kind of spotty to begin with. So, like right now, let's just take that partner that I just talked about. So here's this partner, and they're up, one of those really cold countries, and that's their niche and that's their area. So if you're a provider that's up in that area, it's quite likely that in the early days, you're probably going to see quite a bit of data, and probably even data to make others jealous, right? Because those guys are going to be out there really pushing the envelope. Now, from my perspective, it's my job to essentially clone those people as we case study them. So, like when we build out the website for Exanet services, one of the big things that'll be on there are case studies, white papers of, other things that are there. And these storage partners will definitely be huge case studies, or, maybe one of their specific customers. And then we also showcase them as a partner in that process. But as they come online and we see how it works with them, we see how well they do at what they do, we'll turn around and we'll roll that out to other partners as rapidly as possible and try and get them scattered around the world, you know, at least contingent to what the map looks like, right? If the map shows us that we've got a lot of East Coast, West Coast, Northern Europe, and a couple of other places, well, we'll start really focusing hard on those places in terms of trying to get partners in there that will allow us the best chance to get data. And in that process, it's likely that there's going to be some pockets where we don't hit it very hard early on for whatever reason or the other. and we don't end up getting much customer activity, and ultimately we see that there are some providers that are sort of not, getting their just desserts. What I just said is that proximity is probably going to be the biggest sort of, declinator in the beginning of, who gets data and who doesn't. But what's going to end up happening as we actually start onboarding all of that real data around the world, we're going to start learning a lot, right? And this is really important because it never gets discussed, and I'm not even sure how well we're going to do with it, but I know we're going to try really hard. But we're going to really put a lot of energy into intelligence of understanding how internet backbones really operate around the world, right? And if it turns out that we have a customer up in Northern Europe, but then we have this, provider with a bunch of terabytes down in Portugal, for instance, and for whatever reason, because they actually have like a really high performance, networking connection, and maybe they're really close to some backbone or interconnect, and for whatever reason, the latencies to them are like, 30% lower than they are for a bunch of the providers that are up around really close to the customer. you know, at that point, it might make a lot of sense for us to start pushing, the data out to those providers on a wider scale. And actually, if that does occur to be the case, it's actually a positive because, you know, an earthquake or a volcano or some crazy event could take out an internet connection, backbone connection in one part of a continent and take down, the majority of the stuff that's there. If the providers are scattered on a broader, basis, they're further apart, then ultimately you stand a much greater chance of continuing to have durability, redundancy, and availability of all that data that you uploaded. So I hope that's what happens. And so I would say that performance is definitely going to be a very large part of that puzzle of host selection. And so yes, that's one of the things that you can focus hard on. The performance of the units themselves has not yet been very well plumbed. We haven't really done a lot of, investigation into what does an all NVMe system look like? What does a system look like, that has, striped NVMe and, 10G and, network cards and, crazy ISP connections, you know, could be that we find out really early on that it makes sense to really incentivize you hard to build a couple of those to create a new data tier that we call our premier tier, right? That our top of the line thing, and we charge an arm and a leg for it, right? And we pay you a lot of money to bead that. We don't know. This is all stuff we're going to learn in 2022. We're all really excited about it, but to be honest with you, we just don't know. We don't know. Um, some of
You,
the other things. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, you described the machine that I've got up on the network, so be happy to sign up for that test case on the high performance machine.
Perfect. I mean, absolutely. And I think really once we start onboarding these guys on Monday, we're going to get that opportunity and we're going to start to see that because our host selection on Monday is going to be really basic. It's just very, very basic in terms of how we're selecting hosts on the soft launch. Host selection, you know, getting developed over the course of the next 3 months is going to be a real fun process, and that's where you'll come in. So we'll definitely look to you to be part of that. RJ, come to the stage. The man, the myth, the legend. It's RJ 13491.
Hey, sorry, I just saw that mute button. And this is a question for, I know everyone has a lot going on right now with the launch and getting some of those other things taken care of that you discussed. But is there ever going to be a feature? And let me just throw out this scenario. Let's say like the middle of the month, you go and you're traveling for like 3 weeks or something. You get these big payouts, but you can't like log in. You're not on your network for the Examiner. You get back, and then for whatever reason, the device is dead. Is there ever going to be like a way where you can access that wallet remotely, to where you can like send those funds to a cold wallet or something, so you don't actually have to be like at your residence?
Well, there's multiple questions there, so I'll just take them really quickly. So first of all, it already exists. Coins don't exist inside units. They don't exist in wallets. They exist on the blockchain. So what happens is you have the unlock hash, you have the seed, you have everything you need to essentially instantiate a wallet on another computer and open it up and transfer the coins out of that the Examiner wallet into a cold wallet or into something else. You have to be careful with that and that you don't leave that wallet running 24/7, because ultimately what will happen is you'll start to hit some hurdles with the contracts because they'll get confused, and ultimately you can wreck some contracts. But there's nothing to stop you from opening up that wallet somewhere else and pulling coins out of it and moving them off to another thing. Um, at some point, we will build that in as a remote feature where it's just easy to log in directly to the unit and transfer coins out. That is part of our roadmap for the examiners going forward. But the problem with the examiners with your specific scenario is, specifically with like a 64 terabyte unit, there's never going to be any free coins until you actually get, serious amounts of revenue on the unit, because everything that goes into that unit gets sucked right into collateral. They're like the ultimate piggy bank right now, because everything that you throw at it gets pushed into collateral and you can't touch it, right? It's locked. And then ultimately, once you get to a point where you go passive and shut it all down, then it all becomes available to you after the end of a month, and you'll be able to get that money out and pull it off to use it.
Thanks.
Sure. Scott.
Hi there. Sorry, the unmute takes a little bit of time.
Yep.
You're talking a lot about storage and performance, and obviously those are important metrics for what you're doing. And maybe this is jumping ahead a little bit, but it seems to me that, the next step in any of these projects like this is going to be, how do you add value to that storage? So I think one of the people already talked about AWS and web services. And I guess that's my question is, down the road, is that a possibility? Direct competition for Amazon Web Services actually being able to run virtual machines on this network.
All right, so there's kind of two questions there. The first question is that a lot of what's available on AWS is available on our thing right out of the gate. The S3 compatibility ensures that you can run all kinds of applications. So for instance, you could run a WordPress instance that where all the storage was housed on our network, you know, um, instead of AWS. That's almost trivially easy. You could run all kinds of applications along those lines. What I think you're actually really talking about, though, is EC2 and compute, and that is something we're definitely interested in. What the way we look at it is, if you go to AWS and if you look at how it sort of shook out in the beginning, when Bezos launched his bookstore out of his garage, he wasn't thinking about building a cloud services network. He was thinking about building a bookstore online. And he just happened to have to build a cloud services network behind it to make it actually run. And what he realized is, hey, if I need this, everybody else is going to need this. And it just accidentally sort of turned into the real business behind the business. And, ultimately we went on from there. And so if you look at it, it all started off with S3 storage layer underneath for unstructured object storage. And then on top of it, they just started building all these sort of application layers. They abstracted all the way up to the top, layer. And I think we'll do the same thing. I think we'll probably just look at their map and just start picking things off one by one as they look, useful, and figure out how to do them in a decentralized way. Now, some people say, well, I mean, why don't you just partner up with a bunch of other crypto projects and do it? And we might do some of that. Acash is the one that always gets thrown out there. But I think ultimately we're going to do what we've always done, which is sort of say, we don't really consider ourselves to be much of a crypto project. We're really more about a product project. And ultimately, if there's a real use case for us to build a product, we will build it. And, if it turns out we can also work hand in hand with other open source projects, then yeah, we'll do that too. And it'll be kind of a dual mode thing. Juicy.
Hey, can you hear me?
We can.
All right, perfect. All right, and congratulations on the imminent launch. Really just had a question about the um network map. And what I mean by that is that, for instance, if I wanted to, stand up, several DIYs or even examiners within an area that a relayer may be, would there be some type of feature later down, either within the examiner itself or on SCP Exanet server site, that we'll be able to visualize, like, where those relayers are located, and as well as the nodes, service providers, to kind of help, understand whether or not, we could start pushing out those service providers, storage providers within those areas, that could help, build up contracts and things like that. So just trying to understand if that's something that's going to come later down the line, or if there's any legal or compliance reason to not do that or provide that visualization of the network.
This is an excellent question. The truth of the matter is, I haven't put a lot of thought into it, but the end answer to that, or or at least the first answer, I guess I should say, is that it seems to make a ton of sense, right? I just think if there's any way possible that we can map out all the relayers across the network, it will benefit both the relayer customer and the storage network. The relayer customer will be benefited because more people will stand up, instances where they see that there are relayers in need of it. So certainly they're going to want to do it. So there may be a thing where, customers will opt in as to whether they are identified or not, right? So like, you know, if a customer decides they want to be identified, really no reason why they wouldn't, but you never know. Some might want, but someone says, I'm Bear Aspirin and I'm in Germany. A lot of people are going to want to stand up storage providers around that, right? And so having that on the net map actually out there really could make a ton of sense. So I really thanks for that question, because it's these are the kind of questions that are going to be coming up in 2022. And I think we're going to have this really fun time understanding the best way to sort of address those and really make them happen. And that one right there, I think, is going to turn out to be something that's really, really, really powerful. And like I told you about the company that wants to run a relayer warehouse, right? I mean, that's just going to drive a huge amount of storage provider, instantiation around that area, or at least within proximity that, on high speed internet can be very low latency for those folks. So they know where they can go look. And I think they'll become like magnets, right? The relayers will be like magnets, and
Yeah,
they'll suck in a lot of storage providers. So yeah, good stuff.
awesome. Thanks.
Sure. Everybody's learning tonight, even me. Black Dragon.
Hello.
Yep.
Uh, I kind of hate to say it, but has anybody looked at Kudos? Like they were talking about the high performance machines. Like I've been doing a lot of research on ScPrime and Chia and all kinds of other stuff like that. But they were talking the high performance servers and whatnot that you were talking about earlier, RAID 10 and NVMe drives, 10 gigabyte Ethernet cards, stuff like that. It's basically their base system. I don't understand why they require such a high performance system for their network.
Which project are you talking about?
Well, like one of the main differences between your project and their project that I've seen is that you can get into your project with a Raspberry Pi and an external USB hard drive, right?
Yeah, I get it. I just didn't hear. I missed when you said what the name of the other project. What project are you referring to?
Oh, kudos. Like they
I'm not.
did Kudo Miner and like they're starting to move into that compute, leasing out the compute like you were saying earlier.
I've never
Uh,
heard of them. I just have to plead ignorance. I've never heard of them. I thought you might have been talking about Filecoin because Filecoin, same thing. Filecoin requires a big super micro box, 64 gig minimum of memory. I mean, enormous specs. I mean, big time specs. Is that similar to what you're talking about?
yeah. Like it was like you have to have one of the newer Intel, what is it, Lake something or other. One of the newest generations. They're based off of silver, gold, and platinum. I mean, these processors are like $2,000 a piece.
There's just no need for it. And what ends up happening is and so look, here's the thing. Because we are doing unstructured object storage as our primary thing, and probably will be our primary thing for, you know, 3, 4, 6, 12 quarters. I don't know how long, but it will always, have a very prominent role. We just don't need it. We don't need it. You can run it on a Raspberry Pi, to be frank, and it's good and it actually works and it's fine. You just do not gain any benefit from a higher speed processor, more memory, any of that stuff. The only two things that you would benefit from, and maybe then it turns into memory and processor, but you know, higher speed networking and faster disks. What ends up happening though is when we start moving into the areas like compute, running sort of an EC2 type distributed capability, then yeah, it's going to turn into the opposite, right? We're going to need those big nodes. But see, I'm always been a fan of this. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me for the way that like Filecoin has assembled their network because they've essentially started out 2 years ago, well, 2017 really, saying, you've got to have this big giant configuration. So a lot of their early providers are out there with these ancient 4, 5 year old machines, and the network's still not really even being utilized yet. So by the time the people come aboard and actually start being able to use them, there's going to be a lot of, invalidation of those original platforms, and they're going to just have to put new ones on anyway. So in our case, it's going to be similar. What'll end up happening is people will have made money off their, configurations that they started out with today. But then when we start to add in compute and other kinds of, databasing, data lakes, all kinds of, strong need for different kinds of resources, then, or even running relayer networks, right? We've talked about running a permissionless distributed relayer network. So, those kinds of things will demand that. And I just suspect that what'll happen is people will add additional assets to the network, or they will pull down and upgrade, or they will do that kind of thing. But not needed today, but could very well and likely very well will be needed in the future.
So, like, is that why the Raspberry Pi link might have even been pulled off? Because I heard you say that you'd gotten so many people signing up over a short period of time and whatnot too.
No, it got pulled off just for that. It got pulled off. It got pulled off. Look, I've never been shy about this, and it is what it is. Raspberry Pi got pulled off for the dual-headed reason that one, the type of people that run Raspberry Pi units tend to either be sort of like needing a lot of support or be ultimate hobbyists so that their nodes never stay up for any length of time, and they're always being tweaked and tuned and played around with, and as a population they tend to have a lot lower sort of performance KPIs and metrics, and so that's a big one. And then at the end of the day, the other thing is that when you have that really low end, ingress into the network where there's not really much skin in the game, you can just invest about $60, and next thing you know, you're, providing storage on the network. Um, it breeds a mentality that we just don't want, which is, how do I spend the least amount of money to extract the most amount of your money from your crypto project into my wallet? And then I can run when I'm all done, which might be 6 months from now or 12 months from now. And to me, I'm protecting the rest of you people here in this room by saying, no, no, that's not going to happen here. And if you think it's going to happen, you're going to get told what's what by me directly in the community and also in our processes that we set up, because we want to build the 5-year network where all of you make a ton of money, not the network where you show up and try and drain our treasury over the course of the next 38 days and we see who wins. Because
Well, I've been mining with Antminer for about a year now, and I've been following the project loosely over the last like year and a half, 2 years. But would it be advantageous for me to buy a secondary server and set up a RAID system, possibly using USB SATA 3.0? Would that be fast enough?
that'd be fast enough, and I think it would be a good thing to try. If you're somebody who's been mining our hash rate for a year, and you've been following the project, then you are exactly what we're looking for. You are exactly the kind of community member that we really hope to see. And so yeah, I absolutely, I recommend you pick up some gear and throw up a node on the network and start playing around with configuration.
Well, I
You're
do I do have a node on a network, and it's ran through a VM on a Proxmox machine, and it was relatively simple to set up once I got Windows installed on the server. But now that I have it all set up, it would be easy enough for me to clone and parity it. And then
okay.
I have redundancy. So if one of my nodes goes down, I still have a parity of it on the network.
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing a full backup, I guess there's some value there. I don't know. I think we've done the calcs and have kind of concluded that any sort of redundancy ultimately is lost in terms of, the value in that the revenue that you lose by not just straightforwardly providing that extra storage directly as additional storage capacity ultimately ends up, with the low failure rates of things these days, ending up being sort of, a lost profitability opportunity or a wash at best. But I don't know. I mean, it's to me, we're still in that place where it's kind of a coin flip. I think you can go either way and feel comfortable with it.
Okay. I appreciate your time, and I just wanted to point out kudos so that you could read their stuff, because there was a lot of stuff that the one guy had mentioned that they kind of went over, and I didn't really agree with the way that they're doing it. And I know that they've been hacked several times, and yeah, I don't know what's
Yeah,
going on with them.
took the name down, and I'll look it up, and perhaps we'll talk about them in a future meetup.
How do you said 51% uh network hacks? Is that only on the hash rate?
Yeah, it's a mining hack. That's a proof of work mining hack. If you have enough hash rate that you can take over 51% of the blockchain mining, ultimately you can put in your own software rules, and then you can ultimately double spend the coins. And right now, double spending the coins isn't really easy because we're only on a couple of exchanges and there's a lot of confirmation, so it's a trick. But if the coin price continues to go up and we continue to get more interest and the valuations go up, then it would have become a bigger issue. But at 11 petahash, I think we're fine now, even if we were to have a valuation that went up like, say, 15, 20x. All right, I need to jump to some of these other guys. I got several people in the queue. Thanks for the
Yep.
questions. DJ.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
We can.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I've just got a question around network bandwidth, basically. Given that I'm guessing that there's going to be asynchronous sort of transfers from your data storage providers back to the customer. So if you've got 100 distributors and they're all sending shards back to the customer all at once, how important is internet bandwidth? Because I imagine that that all comes together. So if everyone's got, say, 10 megabit or 20 megabit upload, that's times 100 distributors or 100 data providers. So wouldn't the real bottleneck then sort of be at the customer's end, that their ability to be able to sort of suck in all that data at once?
So there's a lot of facets to that question. I'm not going to go all the way into them, but I'll just cover them sort of really rapid fire over top. So the first thing is that we're focusing on the first sort of period, however many quarters, on archival storage, and what that really ultimately means is that we're going to be focusing on storage that tends to be uploaded and not very much downloaded. Once we start getting into more, present use where people are doing a lot of, revisioning and then, downloading a lot, then it will become a bit more of an issue. But here's what ends up happening is that when you start to shard this stuff out, the customer's download is your upload. So obviously your upload needs to be performant. And in most cases, if you're running out of a residential, or even in many cases, some small business sort of, connections, you've got an asynchronous sort of connection, and it's usually your upload is crippled compared to your downloads. So it's not uncommon to see in a residential that you got like 35 upload and 1,000 down. So that is going to be a challenge. But what ends up happening is, um, there's a lot of parallelization goes on. So if there's 40 shards up there to make up a data set, or 80 shards up there to make a data set, and you only need to actually be able to pull 15 in order to create the individual piece of data you're trying to download, then what we can do is we already do a ton of parallelization, where it goes out and it says, well, look, I only need 15 of these things, so I'm going to go grab 60. And out of those 60, it'll be just like a torrent, right? If you ever looked at a torrent uh, application, what ends up happening is you can see the pieces as they're downloading. And so we go out and we grab 60 and we start to download 60, but then it turns out that there's like 18 to 20 that are really performant. So those are the ones we end up focusing on. Those are the ones that we end up getting the data from, and then we discard the other ones as not being used. Now that uses up a little bit of bandwidth, and ultimately that's going to be an area that you guys are going to want to focus on, is how much do I charge for bandwidth? And at today, I don't have guidance for you. I just don't. What's going to end up happening is, over time, you're going to look at how much downloading is actually happening from your instance, right? Your upload. And you're going to have to make a decision based on what you pay your ISP, right? And what kinds of bonuses or premiums you have to give them to get an unlimited plan, or to move up to something more synchronous, or to get a better, ability to service those requests. And then ultimately, if it turns out, well, it's going to cost me this much money per month, so I'm going to have to set my bandwidth cost a little bit higher. But then remember, on our side, we're going to be looking at that and saying, well, we're going to favor cost as one of our, items as well. So if you kick your bandwidth up to where it's like 30 SCP per terabyte, you're never going to get used, right? So there's that marketplace thing that's going to go on in there. So that's a very big, broad area that will ultimately get fleshed out as we start to roll out the product and the network in a real way, and the telemetrics really do start to tell a story, and that story will then ultimately get reflected in what you guys ought to be charging for bandwidth and what we're willing to pay for it.
Okay, great. And also, I'm finding it hard to find details on mining the coin, as opposed to, so you got your data provider, but if you want to mine the coin, is there any sort of documentation on how you get started with doing that and what's required on it?
That's probably my fault. I started out in this 2017 as a pretty reasonable miner, and I thought mining was really cool. And I kind of went all the way to the other edge where I sort of began to hate mining. And our project started out of a whole mining fiasco, and mining is just, in a lot of ways, it's just not there. There's just a lot of real challenges in my view for proof of work mining. Um, that said, look, at the end of the day, we're about to launch a real product on a blockchain, and security is really important, and proof of work is the gold standard for providing secure blockchain transactioning. And so, you know, we do appreciate all of the people coming aboard. There are a couple of documents I think that are out there that are available. One is from community member 420 Coop, who has identified all of the various ASICs that exist out there that can mine the Blake 2B protocol. There's really only one mining pool that we support. There's two that are active on our chain, so it's not hard to find that information. And as far as actually operating a miner, I mean, really people on the spectrum could mine. It's really easy. It's you just plug it in and hit the address and then that's it. There's just really nothing to it. So ask in the ASIC mining channel, you'll get the information you need and you can be up and running pretty quickly. There's a lot of miners coming on the market suddenly, used miners that are available. So there you go.
Thanks for that. Someone's just pinged me the address, I think. So yeah, thanks for answering those questions.
Cool. ALJE.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Or good evening, wherever you are. Just a quick question. I made an honest mistake with my node during a migration, and one of your community leaders, Andy, helped me out fixing it. But now I see on the provider list there's two instances of the same name. Just wondering when the old instance would disappear, because that was an honest mistake when I was doing a migration to hit this storage and the specs of having a machine running on an SD hard drive rather than a traditional spinning drive.
It's no issue. It does go away over time. I think it's something like 30 days or maybe even a little bit more than that. Um, Perhaps at some point in the future, we'll look at that and we'll figure out a way to hide those. But, you can sort on active to not see it. But yeah, it'll drop off by itself and it doesn't, you don't get deducted for it. It doesn't penalize you. What happens is, those addresses that you see in that chart are not how you get identified on the network. You're not identified by address. The address is how people, essentially know how to find you on the IP network. But the way they know it's you is a unique provider address that you don't see. It's underneath the hood. You actually can see it in one of the Grafana panels, but and you can see it if you go and do a command at the CLI level. But at the end of the day, nothing to worry about. You're just sitting there. Don't worry about it. It'll go away when it goes away.
Okay, thanks. And for the upload speed, and I know you've mentioned asynchronous and what have you, but if you had a 200 up, would that be enough?
200 megabits is good. I mean, I'm here talking to you on 35, and at some point, I really am hungry for more, but it works. And, for doing data uploads, 35 isn't awful. You got to remember, you're not serving whole bits of data. You're serving one small shard out of any given download from a customer. So at any given time, I think in the first couple 3 quarters, it's probably going to be okay. I can't truly answer this, by the way, because I don't know, and I don't think we've really seen the answer on any of these networks. But I think that when things really finally do start getting really busy, I think it'll coincide with the ISPs rolling out higher speeds and more, synchronous between ups and downs because everybody's doing Zoom, everybody's doing all this other stuff, and so they need them. And at the end of the day, I think you're going to see about the time we need it is about the time it's going to become available widely.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Beep Hog Cobbler. Good name. Come on up to the stage. Okay, well, we'll give you some time if there's other questions out there from anybody.
Hey, can you hear
Nope.
me?
We can.
Sorry about that. I'd like to start out by saying I'm very new to the data center space, so I apologize if this isn't a great question. But I know you touched on redundancy. So for me personally, I'm running Unraid server dedicated to this project, and I have one parity drive, and none of the data is striped. Is it worth my time to use that drive for parity, or if a drive drops off and there is no redundancy on my end, will ScPrime rebuild that data if I put a new drive in?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things in there. So the first one is what's happened is with drives, starting newer drives starting to get to this place, and it depends on what kind of drive you use. If you get a really older consumer grade drive and you're going to have decent failure rates on it, well then
I mean,
yeah,
it's 18 terabyte Exos drives. They're
well, so if you're
decent.
having something like that with huge MTBFs, then the answer is you don't want to use it for parity because it's going to make a lot more money if it can actually be filled up with real storage.
Okay, so it makes more sense for me to just lose that data, put in a fresh blank drive, than try and rebuild it myself.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
sure. All right, guys. Good session. Ran a little long tonight. Was hoping to keep it to an hour, but it's okay. We're continuing to have a lot to cover and so forth. I hope these are still working out really well for you, and that you're appreciating doing them and getting good information out of them. We're gonna keep doing them, obviously, as long as we need to, and you want to do them. Um, Even though I've said some pretty confrontational things as far as trying to keep the network at a reasonable growth pace, we do expect this thing to keep growing. The community is not stopping in its growth. It's slowed definitely from what it was doing earlier, but it's not stopping. And I think that, we're going to see those numbers go up. So, what you need to understand and just sort of recognize and trust, I guess, is the only thing I can say is that our desire is to take care of you, over the long term, as long as you demonstrate to us that you expect to be here over the long term. If you highlight or showcase or do anything that reveals true intentions of really, not being here for any longer than, it takes just to get the quick gravy, pour, then what's going to end up happening is we're just not going to pay attention to you and whatever. But I think most of you folks, the fact that you're even sitting here through this kind of a meeting and listening to my whiny voice tells us an awful lot about your desire to be part of the project. And we really are appreciative of you being here, and we love you. So um, that's it for tonight. I guess we'll see you next week. And thanks again for coming. We really appreciate it.